Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Lindsay Lerner, and you're listening to The Cost of the Status Quo. More people than ever are questioning why they do what they do and forging their own path. And on this show, I sit down with these entrepreneurs, trailblazers, creatives, and overall awesome beings to discuss the ideas, the opportunities, and the overall tips and tricks they're using so that the rest of us can do the same. This is The Cost of the Status Quo. Today, we are here with Dr. Brittany Barreto, from getting her Ph.D. in genetics to founding multiple companies, fundraising millions of dollars, having her work published in multiple publications, and now co-founding an incredible nonprofit called FemTech Focus. Brittany knows a thing or two about going against the grain. Like many folks on this podcast, Brittany is motivated by a broader mission. Hers is advancing women's health by equipping founders, investing in innovative ideas, and engaging academia and government agencies to create an ecosystem that fosters better healthcare for women, females, and girls. Additionally, Brittany hosts the #1 FemTech podcast, which we will link to in the show notes. Today, Brittany is here to share a bit about her story and the tips, tricks, and habits she's learned along the way. Listeners, thank you so much for listening. It would mean the world to me if you subscribed, rated, and reviewed this. Welcome, Brittany. Thanks so much for taking the time to be here.
Thanks for having me.
First things first, where are we calling in from?
I'm calling in from Raleigh, North Carolina.
And for some context, where did you grow up and what was that experience like?
I grew up in northern New Jersey, so it's the part of the state that actually has like really big mountains, and it's known for its dairy farms. So you would not think a Jersey girl like grew up with the smell of cow manure, but it actually smells like home to me.
Incredible.
So definitely actually a country girl with like a fast-paced lifestyle. It's a really cool hybrid kind of model there.
What were you interested in at a young age?
First of all, I was a little ham. And I don't know if that's like a Jersey term or what. I really haven't heard many other people say it, but I was like in all the little talent shows, and I would make little dances, and I would just make up dance moves in my bedroom and be like, Mom, I'm going to go like be in the talent show and dance to NSYNC or Backstreet Boys. Or did you see that? I don't know if it was a Vine or Boomerang or whatever, but like it was showing like how girls in the 90s danced for their talent show. And then they showed like TikTok, how girls dance today. And it was like some girl in her like garage and she's like moving her arms around. And that was significant. That was 110% me. 110% me.
I got the visual.
Yes. So anyway, so I was always very extroverted. I liked being in the spotlight. I thought I hated science. So 7th grade was geology. We learned about rocks. And I can remember distinctly telling my mom, like crying, like, I hate science. Science is the worst. I hate it. The next year, 8th grade, we had cellular biology where we learned about the nucleus and DNA and mitochondria, and I loved it. So turns out I just don't like rocks. Really important middle school lesson. Like Britt hates rocks. She loves DNA. I'm blessed to have had a pretty specific idea of what I wanted to do or be. I thought I wanted to be a genetic counselor because that's somebody who is, filled with empathy. They're very like meeting with patients. And a lot of times the patients they're meeting are pregnant women who either are above a certain age, so they need genetic testing done, or they come from a lineage of genetic disorders. And so they get this testing done and they need someone who's compassionate to tell them about the results and make a plan for what they should do next. Sounds really impactful and important. And I was like, that's what I want to be. And so I went to college, and that's what I want to be, a genetic counselor. And I went and I shadowed one for the day. And any listeners who may still be in school, please go shadow the career you think you want to do, because it was such a pivotal moment for me, because I realized that genetic counselor spent her whole day telling pregnant women that her babies were terribly sick and like might die. And they should make these plans around like in-house healthcare for their new baby. Or I was like, oh my God, I just chose the saddest job in the world. Like, who would actively choose a job where you tell pregnant women their babies aren't going to make it? Like, that's the worst job ever. And so I ran back to my advisor and was like, I apparently chose the worst job in the world. I now have no idea what I'm going to do. He suggested an internship in his laboratory to see if I liked laboratory-based science. And turns out I do have a knack for it. You definitely need to have like time management skills and like have delicate hands with glassware. But, so it's a skill set that I had. And that's what made me pursue a PhD
Before you went and you did that practical experience, was there someone in your world that had that profession or?
Oh, no. I come from a long line of trailer park residents. My mom is from, like, South Florida, like, trailer park. My dad is from a son of an immigrant from Portugal, like, trailer on Jersey Shore type of deal. So, for me, education was, one, a way to dissociate from my current unfortunate upbringing. I had a lot of trauma, there was a lot of abuse, and so for me, I was able to dissociate by studying or reading, and I wasn't studying purely out of, like, the joy of learning. I was studying out of the, like, necessity to not be present. Secondly, it was my way out. Most of the kids in my high school are still in town. Like, they seem happy. That's great for them. For me, I don't fit in here.
That hits home. What sort of research or what sort of questioning, like what sort of line of questioning went into being able to find a genetic counselor?
This idea that 3 billion nucleotides, or you can consider them letters, 3 billion letters make you who you are. I just thought that was just the coolest thing. I'm just obsessed with it. I just love it. I love DNA. I think it's just the coolest thing. Fun fact, the more and more I learned about genetics, the more and more spiritual I became. And I think a lot of people think those two things can't exist together. In fact, they're quite opposing. People are very surprised by my spirituality, given how much of a scientist I am. And, the more that you learn about DNA, the more you realize, like, there is a synchronized swimming orchestra in every one of your cells. And, I do think that the universe has goals. The more scientific you get, especially in genetics, actually, the more spiritual you become.
During your journey of figuring out that you didn't want to be a genetic counselor, what was going on around you? What were the surrounding forces of, hey, maybe you should try this, maybe you should do that? All of those coulda, shoulda, wouldas. Like what were those like, and how were you able to focus and stay focused on not only science but DNA specifically?
I was actually just speaking yesterday to a woman who has a son in college, and she was like, "Do you mind if I ask you some questions about being a PhD?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And so we were chatting, and she reminded me of all the things that I didn't know going into college that I was like, I wish someone gave me that handbook. So, she was like, "What is a PhD, a doctor? Like, are you still a doctor?" And I was like, "Yes." And I was, bing, I remember being freshman year and, like, calling my mom and being like, "Did you know you could be a doctor and, like, not work in a hospital? There's, like, different ways to be a doctor." And I think that we take for granted that kids that are going to college have somebody in their life who's been there, or have been around people who understand how academics work, or how science works, or how the system works. I showed up on a scholarship, like, I was just like, "Hey, what's up? I'm here to learn. Like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I love DNA," and, like, having these conversations where my professors would say, "Doctor," and I'd be like, "All my professors are doctors. I don't know why they don't have clinics, but it's because they're PhDs." Or another thing, I was talking to this woman, she was like, "We, in our family, we don't really have the money to pay for him to go to graduate school." I said, "Well, in PhD, they pay you." She was like, "They pay you?" I said, I know, it's crazy. I didn't learn that until my senior year. I was applying for schools and I was like, "What is this thing, the stipend thing? Is that how much I owe?" And I asked my academic advisor, he was like, "No, that is what they pay you." I'm like, "They pay me?" So there's just, like, these privileged assumptions of somebody else in your family has done that, gone through the process, and is telling you what they perceive to be the most basic set of information that is obvious to them, right? Like, but to me was like total news. Like, I grew up on a dairy farm. Like, I have no idea. But honestly, I look back and it was a whole lot of, like, just acting like a good human, and people seeing that in me and seeing the potential and being like, "Hey girl, come over here. Come over here." Like, or let's do this. Come on, just do that.
A little bit of serendipity.
A whole lot of serendipity, more than I can even describe.
And so you finish up undergrad and then obviously go on to get your PhD. And from there, what was that entry point for you into the FemTech world?
I'll back up a little bit and say that I've also been very entrepreneurial. I can remember I was like 8 years old and my mom told me about painted rocks. Like people buy painted rocks, like rock pets. And I remember being 8 years old and I was like, I can paint rocks. And she set me up with like essentially a little lemonade stand, but instead of lemonade, I sold rocks that I painted. And I think maybe one neighbor bought one.
Is that where your disdain of geology comes from?
Maybe. I didn't connect those dots, girl. Maybe the poor sales I had that day I have some trauma work to do about that. That's a great thing. I need to meditate on that one.
Yeah.
In college, I sold sex toys on the side to make ends meet. So I was an independent distributor of Athena's Home Novelties, which is sex toys. And in that experience, and I am linking this to FemTech, I promise, but like that was—
You got to get paid for parties.
Yeah, yep, you get paid to come and do a passion party. And actually, again, I look back and I'm like, oh my God, I was doing sex ed is what I was doing, because the party, you're like describing the products and describing like why you shouldn't use this in your vagina because you have this thing called a flora and you need to clean your toys because you have a flora. And, like here's where the pleasure zones are. And I mean, I was doing parties for like 50-year-old women who were like, wait, where and how, So I had that experience, which was sex tech, which is also women's health, and it's also entrepreneurial. Going into graduate school, I realized that like I had way too much personality to work in a lab my whole life. Like I would joke about how, a certain powder looked like cocaine and no one else laughed. And I was like, like those types of things where, my friend in lab would leave for the day and I'd be like, bye, I love you. And they'd be like, goodbye, and I'd be like, oh God, I'm so weird. Like in this environment, I'm weird, like I'm the weirdo. So I tried to find like, what other career paths could I do with a PhD? And then entrepreneurship is one of them. So I attended a pitch day and I fell in love because these were engineers, doctors, scientists, like some kind of subject matter experts presenting an idea that if it worked, it could impact people's lives today. And I felt like the research I was doing in lab was important, but it was essentially a hope that someone in 20 years like picks it up and does something with it, right? So I like that in-person impact. I also love this idea of pitching, like you're selling something. And I had always presented my scientific presentations very salesy.
Did that work in that space? Was that received well?
It was received well, mostly because all the other scientific presentations are usually very dull and unanimated. So when I get on stage, I would take it as a personal challenge to make people passionate about E. coli, because that's the like organism I use is E. coli. Talking about the research in human health and clinical trials. And because I was in the human molecular genetics department, I was more on the molecular side. Many of my peers were on the human side. So you'd think like them saving lives would be better to listen to or more impactful to listen to than like some small RNA I discovered in E. coli. But I made it my mission for everyone to want to talk about my presentation. So kind of. So I had this crazy idea. I had a crazy idea for a DNA-based dating app. I actually had that idea back in college, but I had no idea what to do with it. I got it after a seminar we had in college around the science of attraction and pheromones and evolutionary principles behind mating. And I remember asking my professor saying, could I make a geneharmony.com? Because at the time we didn't have apps, right? We still had the websites. And he was like, I mean, I guess you could, but that's strange. And he scoffed. He literally, like scoffed. And in that moment, I was like, that's so cool. One day, that would be so cool if I did that. Fast forward, I'm in this PhD program. I'm now, becoming a geneticist. I'm in this ecosystem of startups. People are asking me, Britt, when are you going to start a company? What are you going to do? And I was like, well, I just have this one crazy idea. And then November 2016 happened. November 2016 is when who became the president. I was so distraught about the direction of our country that I was like, I need to be a woman of influence and power. And I said, how am I going to be a woman of influence and power? And I thought, I need money. Money does that, and I thought, how am I going to get money? And I was like, I have this crazy idea for DNA-based dating app. Maybe that's my thing. That'll make me a ton of money. So December 2016 is when I founded Pheramor, which was the world's first DNA-based dating app. essentially I fundraised, I built and scaled that company. Unfortunately, about 2.5 years into it, it did close. It had to do with Apple policy. Apple actually has a huge monopoly on what apps we get to use or see. So next time you think that you're just Googling in the App Store, you're really not Googling. Because that would assume that you'd have the World Wide Web. You are essentially looking through the Apple approved applications in the App Store. And one day Apple decided we weren't a good fit and they kicked us off, and I kind of closed my company.
Do you have a biggest learning from that first venture?
Oh my God, trust myself. There were so many people I should have fired so much faster than I did. And I knew it. I freaking knew it. 2.5 years of me having a sense of something, a feeling, an intuition, an idea, being like, if I bring that up, people will ask why. And I don't really have data. It's just a sense. It's just a sense. So therefore, I shouldn't bring it up. And then sure enough, things would happen exactly how I thought they would. And then in the end, my idea was the thing we needed to do or whatever. So today I really continue to work on decreasing the time it takes between me having a feeling inside about this person needs to be hired. This needs to be fired. This contract shouldn't be passed up on. This contract should be signed, right? Whatever it is, trying to decrease that time from having the feeling to executing it. Because during that company, I let it run for way too long because I wasn't confident enough in myself.
Are there any tactical things that you go through, whether it's internally or externally, to get to that point and to shorten that time span?
Yeah.
That's something that listeners across the board have come to me and told me about their struggles of, well, I had this gut feeling, but because I couldn't fit it into a spreadsheet, because it didn't fit, the accountant didn't agree, the CFO didn't agree, whoever it was. And these are founders, non-founders, just general people who are listening and engaging with the audience. That's it. And so how do you decrease that time?
I think for me, the data, the Excel sheet is how many times it happened and it worked out exactly how I originally thought. And so now I have this data set of so often this feeling is right. So I can use my logic brain as like, okay, we have some history here, and by history, I mean like a freaking ton of examples. I also really honor my twilight zone when I'm about to fall asleep. I have a little notepad next to my bed that I'll just jot things down. It's almost meditative, where you're clearing the noise, you're clearing your inner child's voice, you're clearing anxiety, and it's just some inner like core voice that has all the data without all the bullshit and is able to be like, do this, go on that trip, like, so I try to really honor that voice when I hear it at night.
From there, I know you went on to found another company.
Yeah, so then I became an investor and I was working in venture capital, and that is where I discovered FemTech. So I was mentoring founders from all different, sectors and industries, and then I met this one woman, and she was a pediatric gynecologist. She still is. Her name's Dr. Julie Hakim, and she's an incredible woman who's still in my life today. This was like 2018, 2019-ish. She is a pediatric gynecologist, and she told me that she's inventing the first ever vaginal stint. And I said, okay. And by the way, she was saying vagina a lot in public. And I was at the time very like, oh my God, she keeps just saying it. She keeps just saying it. Like, we're in public, like, and she's not even caring, which is hilarious considering how often I say vagina in every aspect of my life today. But at the time I was like, oh my gosh, she keeps saying it. So she said that something she experiences as a pediatric gynecologist is sometimes girls are born with birth defects or an accident happened or something, whatever, and she has to reconstruct their vagina. And there's no such thing as a vaginal stint. And so what she has to do in order to keep the vagina open and not close and healing shut is she puts gauze in a medical glove, ties off the end, and uses that as the stint, sews the girl's labia shut, and has her lay in this hospital for a week until it heals enough that she can then pull it out. I was like, excuse me?
There's got to be a better way.
Is this some nonprofit in the third world country? She's like, oh, no. This is Texas Children's Hospital and the largest medical center in the world, Texas Medical Center, and I was like, what? This is unacceptable. And she goes, by the way, my stint will also be able to be used for women with any pelvic area cancer because when they have radiation treatment, radiation essentially is like really bad sunburn. Women who have cervical cancer, uterine cancer, ovarian cancer, whatever, that radiation will sometimes cause their vaginas to melt shut. She's just saying it. She's just like, yeah, that's like the standard of care. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa.
Talk about a problem to solve. My goodness.
Here I am mentoring somebody who's like, I'm going to use bacteria to make oxygen on Mars. And they're raising $10 million. And then here I have Julie who's like, I'm self-funded and like, I just want women's vaginas not to melt shut. And I'm like, yeah, no shit. That would be really important.
For those who don't know, could you shed a little bit of light on the venture capital world and the discrepancies and disparities that you've encountered?
For sure. So in general, a venture capital fund is essentially a team of people, like whether it be one person or 5 people, they're like the managers of this money. They will go and fundraise money from very, very, very wealthy entities, whether that be banks, corporations, or family offices. A family office essentially is like the Walton family, which is the Walmart family. Like they have so much money, they literally have their own kind of institution to do stuff with it. So venture capital general partners, what they do is they fundraise a pot of money from these people, these super, super rich people, and then they will invest in startups. And the goal is to 10x that money investment, and they have about 10 years to do it. And these funds have investment theses, so like they're going to invest in certain types of industries or stages or states or whatever. Some of the underlying discrimination against who gets to decide on the stuff is the fact that, one, it takes about $100,000 to start a venture fund. And you're also expected as the general partner of this fund to contribute at least 2% of the fund with your own money. And so if you are not wealthy, it is almost impossible for you to start a fund. And so essentially what's happening is rich people are starting funds, getting money from their other rich family friends to fund it. So even if you did scrape together $100,000 plus 2% commitment, you still have to find rich people. And so finding them at a conference is different than calling them for a pool party at your mansion, right? Like, let's talk deals. So it's very different. So you have to be rich to even start a venture fund. Not all the time, but it pretty much. And then you have to know rich people. And then you get to decide which startups get investing. And so very quickly you can start to see the type of demographic of person who is running these things, and therefore how, based on who they are, that decides what kind of deals they're probably the most excited about. If you are these general partners, I think it's something like 96% is the ratio now, is male or decision makers. And so if you can imagine a white, hetero, cis man named Brian, and you go to Brian and you're like, I have a startup and we're addressing heavy menstrual bleeding in the Black female community, he may not be excited about that. It's a very FOMO world. So it's a lot of like, this is what I'm doing and it's better than what you're doing. And a lot of people being like, man, I want to do that. Right. And so it's like a lot of high school cafeteria energy, which I'm not a fan of.
Correct. And my favorite part about it all is that Brian's never run a business.
This is all this is a persona person, by the way. We're not describing any one real person, but.
Correct.
So yeah, you can see there's lots of issues in investing that are just baked right into it.
Exactly. And so to go back to your friend, let's learn more.
So we have, Mars company trying to make bacteria make oxygen. Brian's super excited about that because one day he wants to go to Mars, right? But you go to Brian with women's vaginas are melting shut. And he's like, oh, that's really important. But oh my God, I don't really know anything about that. I don't have that problem. Another thing investors like to do is invest in things they understand. And so when you go to them with a problem they didn't even know existed because society tells women to not talk about it, God forbid, you know how 1 in 4 pregnancies end in miscarriage. And we live in a society where we tell women, don't tell anyone you're pregnant till the 2nd trimester because that's when you decrease chancing of miscarriage. Why the fuck do we set that up for women? Because we set them up to suffer in silence. Don't let the public know that you've had a tragedy. That's uncomfortable for others. Don't tell us that you're pregnant until you're like seriously pregnant. That's unacceptable. That's trash. And so we have this society that thinks miscarriaging is really rare. And so when the 1 in 4 pregnancies end in one, that woman thinks, oh my God, I'm that 1 in a million. Something's wrong with me. And so FemTech is not only like this badass industry of innovation, it's also a activist move to get society to start talking about periods. Stop using blue liquid in commercials. We're not aliens. We bleed blood, right? Like we need
Every
to
month.
be able to, yeah. If you have erectile dysfunction ads, you have to have sexual wellness ads for women, right? If you can have a phallic looking object, I should be able to have a vulva looking object. And I'm not saying like we need to be having spread wide legs on a billboard, right? Like I'm just saying like a peach, that's like insinuating, because we have plenty of the phallic things for hymns and all that Roman and all that stuff. So yeah, we have a society that tells women to suffer in silence, and if they do have a problem, they're likely the only one, and they should feel ashamed about it and not talk about it. And so now all of a sudden women are rising in STEM, and we are seeing the rise in STEM correlate to the rise in solutions that address women's health. FemTech is essentially it's solutions to conditions that solely, disproportionately, or differently affect females, women, and girls. And so I'll break that down real quick. The solely, disproportionately, differently. Solely is your boobs and tubes, right? Like it's it's like historic, like your typical women's health.
Yes.
It's like periods, maternal health, menopause. There's disproportionately, so 90% of Hashimoto's patients are autoimmune disease patients are women, or migraine patients, disproportionately female. And then you have the things that differently affect us. So men have more heart attacks, but women die of heart attacks more often because the way that the clogs in our arteries appear are very different than men's. Our current cardiac healthcare system is made based on a male heart health. And so women's hearts are suffering.
You'd be able to fact check me on this, but I think on a call the other day, I heard that for FDA approval, it wasn't necessary for women to be involved in those tests that were being run until 2017.
Yeah.
That's terrifying.
So between the years of 1977 and 1993, it was illegal to include females in clinical trials. And then even after 1993, though, it just became legal. It wasn't required. And it wasn't until recently that they made it a requirement that you had to have representation. And yet still there is no requirement for pregnant or breastfeeding women. So most of clinical trials are done with women on birth control. And so it's not even your real freaking female. It's a hormoned female, which could be fine. But there's plenty of women not on birth control that need to take medicine. We still don't understand how it affects them. 72% of FDA drugs have zero data on pregnant or breastfeeding women. We literally are just, they say, ask your doctor, right? In the commercials, they're like, if you suspect you're pregnant, ask your doctor, right? So I've asked the doctors, I'm like, maybe they get some memo that like, I don't know. The doctors are like, oh no, they just are passing the buck onto us in terms of risk.
So all of that, presumably, and correct me if I'm wrong, is what led you to starting FemTech Focus.
Yeah, as you can see, I'm like freaking fired up. I've been fired up for 3 years and it hasn't waned at all. It's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. So, after meeting Julie, she really sparked it for me. I started to essentially Google stuff and realized how deep this problem was, and the historical and systemic exclusion of females from scientific and healthcare innovation. It was just like, oh my God, there's so much opportunity, so much wrong. I'm going to get a job at a FemTech fund. There's these venture funds I've been telling you about. There was only one in the world investing in FemTech in 2019. I was like, what? Okay, let me go to an accelerator. An accelerator is, you can think about it like a boot camp for startups to fast forward in their development. No FemTech accelerators in the whole world in 2019. I was like, are you kidding? Okay, I'll go to a conference. There was no FemTech conference in 2019. There was no ever previously or current or future. And then I was like, oh, let me listen to a podcast. No podcast on FemTech. I was like, this is the most important industry in the world. And we don't even have a podcast? Like, there ain't no blog? Like, come on. And so then March 2020 hits. We go into lockdown, and I decide, well, hell, I got all this spare time on my hands now because I'm just sitting around in my apartment. I'm going to start a podcast. And the podcast, I called it FemTech Focus. Within a few weeks, I had a few thousand listeners, quit my day job by June 2020, and I've been doing this ever since. I just want to make sure that some people in the audience, whether that be a virtual, physical, whatever, see themselves in me, even if it's the parts of themselves that they're not proud of or they think are a disadvantage, like their rough upbringing. The best founders and the best entrepreneurs all have PTSD. Like, no one in their right mind, in the healthy attachment style, like, you would never choose this career. You would get a job with a salary and health insurance, like, with vacation days. The fact that I'm like, I don't like to answer to people. I have authority issues. I have, I want you to like me issues. I have complex PTSD. Some days I need the day off mentally, right? And we still don't live in a world just yet that you can just send a text or email in being like, nope, mental health day. Like, but as an entrepreneur, I can be like, nope, today's a sad day and I'm going to honor that and cuddle with my dog and take a walk. Maybe I'll work later. I don't know. I don't operate well in the masculine structured world of 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, have to be there on time. Like, I don't do well with that.
Before we wrap up, I'd love to hear a couple of minutes about FemTech Focus and if there's any way that our audience can engage with you, support you, assist in growing, whether it's awareness, fundraising, any opportunities like that.
FemTech Focus, we have two main goals. One is to raise awareness for the need of sex-specific healthcare innovation. I'm not saying like just women, men suck. I'm very bullish that this is not a feminist, angry, anti-men campaign. We have men that are involved in FemTech and they are the best quality of men ever, right? Like, they know when they should give their opinion. They know when they should ask questions, right? Like, if you're looking for an awesome man, look in FemTech because they're like the best. They're cream of the crop, like good communicators, like really humble. Anyways, this is not some angry all women all the time thing. It's a asking yourself, was sex considered in this scientific experiment? Like the cell lines we use, like when we're screening compounds for potential cures to disease, what cells are we using? 75% of the time, it's XY cells. It's male cells. So we are potentially missing major blockbuster drugs that could work in females, but just not in males. But since the backdrop to scientific discovery is male, we are missing things. So all I do and my goal is to have people ask, was sex considered in this FDA approval? Was sex considered in the development of the car seatbelt? Because it wasn't, by the way. There is still no regulation requiring female test dummies be used. Women die more often in car crashes than men because seatbelts are optimized for their bone structure. I digress. So, number one, raise awareness for the need for sex-specific healthcare innovation. 2, support the founders innovating in this space. Founders in FemTech are the most selfless, passionate, collaborative, generous, altruistic people I've ever met in my life. I love this industry. I've never been asked to sign an NDA. Everyone's like, man, if you steal my idea and make it happen, like, good for women. Like, that's good, right? Like, I have never met an industry that is so motivated by passion versus money. Now, that might be one of our weaknesses. And so we need some good financial like input here, like some experts, but nevertheless, that underlying motivation is so pure. So I want to support these founders. So we do these two goals, the awareness and the support, through a podcast, a virtual community, market research, and events. And so the best way to know about these things are to subscribe to the podcast. Just look up FemTech Focus on any streaming device. You could be the one you're listening to right now. Just look up FemTech Focus, give it a follow. You can subscribe to our newsletter on our website, femtechfocus.org. And that newsletter will then let you know about, upcoming events or opportunities we have, what new episode just dropped. And then our virtual community, again, on our website, there's a button there to join our community. We have about 2,000 members, and you don't have to be a FemTech founder to join or an investor. We have plenty of what I call fem fans. So people interested in the industry, trying to like explore it, because women's health is not just for doctors or scientists or engineers. It is for designers. We need good designs that aren't just butterflies and pink. Every sexual wellness device that I've seen in femtech is not a vibrating rabbit, okay? Because those were made by men, assuming what women wanted. Anyways, we need designers, we need UI UX, we need software development, and we need security. Like data security is a huge issue for us now. Like, so if you're a lawyer, we need some advice. We need every skill set. Politics. Women's health is so wrapped up into politics. We need advocates, we need lobbyists, right? Like, so anyone and everyone is welcome. The easiest thing you can do if you've been inspired by this episode is, if you're a man, ask the women in your life what their healthcare experience has been like. Ask them, what was your experience like when for your last pap smear? What was that like? Ask them about, have you ever had trouble finding the right birth control? So often men don't even know what women have to deal with or think about on the daily basis. All the tabs open in our brain, right? That have to do with our healthcare, because the system's not set up for us to be, successful at it. And then if you're a woman, start talking about it. Talk about the great sex you had the other night and how they did this thing to your clitoris or that or whatever. Like, people need to know like how our bodies work. If you're breastfeeding, like some of this is up to you, right? Like, it's up to you and your lifestyle. I'm kind of on the radical end. I bring my 3D printed clitoris to every party I go to, and I'm like, hey, listen, like, this is what it looks like. So if you're on the other side of the spectrum, I can respect that. And thank you for balancing me out. But the moral of my story is to talk more so about your experiences. If you do open up about it, the amount of other people in your life who are also suffering with that or know someone who is astronomical, and you will not feel alone anymore. And it's not just for you, it's also empowering others. It's a long way down the open road, but I've got my shoes tied on tight, no fear in my eyesight.
Before we wrap up, we do ask every amazing guest 2 questions. What is the worst piece of advice that you've ever gotten? And what's the best piece of advice?
The worst advice I ever got was from my boss when I worked at the venture capital firm. They were wildly underpaying me, but admittedly, I asked for the salary that they gave me. I was paying myself $55,000. I think women don't talk about money enough, so I'm going to do it. I was paying myself $55,000 at Pheramor. And if I had talked about it then, I would have realized other founders were paying themselves, predominantly male founders, were paying themselves $100,000 a year. So I was already at a disadvantage. But when I applied for the venture capital gig, they asked what my desired salary was, and I said 60,000, because I thought a $5,000 increase was like a really big deal. And I remember telling my boss, especially after they gave me a promotion to senior venture associate, I said, I need a raise. They were like, oh, nah. And I said, I honestly, I can't even pay my bills with what I get now. Like, every month I get into credit card debt further. The worst advice I ever had was, why don't you start a YouTube channel for makeup tutorials? That was my mentor. That was my boss. That was my person who was like, you can talk to me, and that person suggested, and I'm not even wearing makeup here, right? So I'm not some makeup guru. Like, it's not like I have some makeup line, like, that was his suggestion though. Make a YouTube makeup tutorial website. Best piece of advice is that you are pre-approved. I actually read this in a Christian book, believe it or not. Christianity, religion, church at one point was something I really needed at one point in my life. And I was reading a lot of Christian books, and some of them are crap, but some of them are pretty good, like life lesson stuff. And this one book was called The Best Yes. And it was about like Jesus saying yes to you, yada, yada. We leave the Jesus out of it. But the one of the chapters was on being pre-approved. And they were like, if you could think about yourself as all the credit card companies do when they mail you spam mail that say you are pre-approved for this loan or this credit card or whatever, you are pre-approved. There is nothing that you need to do, say, be, happen for you to be approved, whether that be by your parents, whether that be by your partner, by your children, by your peers, by yourself. You don't need to do anything to be approved. And I so often thought I needed a trophy to be loved. I needed a trophy to be recognized or remembered. I was always very fearful of being forgotten. But you are pre-approved, y'all. You don't have to do anything in order to be approved as a human. Your value is inherent.
And on that beautiful note, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Cost of the Status Quo and learning the wisdom, stories, and ideas that will have you feeling inspired and ready to take on the world. If you've enjoyed this, please remember to share, rate, and review. It means the world to me and the team putting it all together. If you're looking for more information, you can find us at costofthestatusquo.com or on Instagram at costofthestatusquo. If you've got any questions or curiosity about me, you can find me at lindseylerner.com. That's LINDSEYLERNER.com or on Instagram at lindseylerner. Thanks again for listening. Hope you have an awesome day. Are you building something awesome but need an outside perspective or bigger team? Nova, a creative agency and design consultancy, is here to help. Nova's team has a diversity of lived experiences that allow them to bring these big ideas to life. To learn more about how Nova can become an extension of your team, check out wearenova.co.